Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to hear Robert Barnes, but I am going to turn over the channel to Robert Barnes. Does he know he's on camera?
Am I good? I'm live. I'm live. All right. Here at the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas. I can't hear anything. I can't see anything. I can only talk. So what we have here is the Bitcoin conference. Was meeting up with Chris Pavlovski, the CEO of Rumble. Apparently, there's been updates on the Rumble Google lawsuit that we will have an update on Sunday. What the chances of Rumble prevailing in that case ultimately are. We're also going to be talking today about other aspects of Bitcoin, including the Roger Ver case. Roger Ver is known as Bitcoin Jesus, and we're here at the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas. This is a man who is the leader in promoting Bitcoin, particularly its democratizing aspects, the ability to free up financial capital in such a way that ordinary, everyday people can have more power than central banks and central planners. In that capacity, he was launching a political revolution. He was aware of that as somebody who started out as a libertarian activist and advocate, basically exposing Ruby Ridge, exposing what happened in Waco. Because of it, the federal government, when he was just a young kid, young libertarian advocate, tried to put him and succeeded in putting him in federal prison for doing what? For not selling or buying fireworks over the internet in the right way. That educated him as to the necessity and moral justification of his cause, that we need to have the central government have less power, not more. And he saw Bitcoin as a way to challenge and contest and question that centralization of power financially and politically, to free up not only individual enterprise, but to free up ordinary everyday people to not have the social digital credit score system that we see being employed as we speak in countries like China, and ultimately maybe around the world with central bank digital currencies. He decided to launch that advocacy and was so successful in launching that advocacy that the outcome was that they decided to put him under investigation again. He recognized, he said, that's it. I've had enough. I'm going to leave the country. I'm going to pay all my tax and be finished with it. He hired accountants. He hired lawyers. He hired a team of financial and tax professionals to advise him on the proper way to do so. The only reason he owed any tax at all, but even theoretically, was because the Internal Revenue Service under the Obama administration had decided that if you left the country, it was going to pretend all of your assets magically become income. And in that simple single step, they were able to completely control who could leave, when they could leave, how they could leave, but more consequently, could create a property tax in direct violation of the Constitution's requirement that any direct tax on the American people, including a property tax, has to be apportioned equally amongst the states and has to be uniform across the nation. This constitutional provision was only limited by the 16th Amendment, which said the income tax did not have to meet the apportionment or uniformity requirements. But what they were taxing in the case of the exit tax is not income. They were pretending your assets as income. Government fabrication is a lie intended to be able to steal people's money and property and be able to impose new, extraordinary, radical power over people's lives. In the 1930s, the IRS said, you should just sit back and be quiet and be happy that we don't tax you for cooking your own food in your own house. This is the logic of where the government wants to go. And they decided to use the exit tax as the way to begin to launch it. The constitutionality of the exit tax has never been adequately dealt with by the Supreme Court of the United States. So how did they decide to enforce it? By select civil and criminal proceedings. The first ever exit tax to reach a criminal case is the case of Roger Ver. Right? Even though Roger Ver followed all the rules as he understood them to be, the IRS itself couldn't make up its mind about whether Bitcoin was an asset, whether it was income. If it was income, what kind of income was it? Especially in the exit tax context, were you supposed to treat it by the mark-to-market value, based on the market valuation of Bitcoin at the time, based on the value of Bitcoin later, based on the value of Bitcoin at the time of actual purchase, based on the Bitcoin value at the time of actual sale? All of these things were undetermined and undecided by the IRS. Despite that, Roger Ver went to great lengths and great efforts to pay every penny, nickel, dime, and dollar they could possibly say is due for a tax that is unconstitutional to begin with, just so he wouldn't be subject to federal U.S. governmental control as he launched his Bitcoin revolution to economically democratize and politically democratize the world, to give ordinary people real power against the concentrated corruption of our government and system. That's just the beginning of the Roger Ver story. We'll get back to more after now. Back to Viva. And now we're back, as Paul Harvey would say, with the rest of the story. So Roger Ver, where we left off, had decided to exit the United States in order to be able to preserve and protect the freedoms of other Americans in the United States. Contrary to what Elon Musk and some others thought, he didn't leave the United States in rejection of Americans. He did so to protect and advance the interest and the freedom and the liberty interest of Americans and those around the world. And the only way he could achieve and accomplish that was to exit a country that wanted to use its legal authority and control over him to silence him, to suppress him, to censor him. He recognized about a decade before everybody else did, not only of the incredible exponential power of Bitcoin to be an individual tool of freedom in the toolbox of liberty, but also the great dangers of the central governments and central banks, central planners to try to use censorship and financial mechanisms and methods and means of control to suppress these new growing liberty movements. In that capacity, he leaves the United States, files all the exit tax returns they claim, an exit tax that most legal scholars who looked at it concluded was unconstitutional because it was a direct tax on people's property without being apportioned or uniform according to the requirement of the Constitution from the very time of our founding. He leaves and he begins and continues his effort to be Bitcoin Jesus, advocating for Bitcoin in its truest, purest form, in a way that could unleash individual economic freedom and opportunity, but also disempower central banks and central governments. He is so successful doing so, he creates opportunities of different forks within the Bitcoin movement, all kinds of other efforts to be able to achieve this democratic dream, little d democratic, little individual empowerment. In that capacity, he writes and publishes a book called Hijacking Bitcoin. Who were the main adversaries in this context? It was the central intelligence agencies, the central banks, the central planners, the central governments, who were doing everything possible to suppress the freedom capacity that Bitcoin provided. And even though it was a computer algorithm to your ordinary everyday boomer, to younger generations, it was red-pilling them on the importance of monetary policy. People that never had any interest in a 19th century Austrian economist were now college dropouts telling you all about Austrian economics, about the gold standard, about fiat currencies. All of a sudden, this became a form of currency of its own kind. It was using the opportunity to get independent and wealthy to red pill the world. And that led to a book called Hijacking Bitcoin. Within a month of that book being published, the U.S. government indicted Roger Ver. For what, you might say? He followed his advisors. He followed his accountants. He followed his lawyers. He paid tax he didn't even owe. He paid tax that was unconstitutional in the first place. Why? Because they wanted to suppress and censor his message and to send a message to everybody else. Stick your head up and challenge what we're trying to do. Stick your head up and advance a cause of Bitcoin as a tool of individual freedom, and we'll lock you up. Look at what we did to Bitcoin Jesus. If the government can crucify Bitcoin Jesus, imagine what they can do to you if you advance the individual cause that Bitcoin can be on the freedom opportunity space. And so they decided to indict him. Now, you look at the underlying nature of the indictment. Not only is it a completely novel indictment, there's never been an indictment challenging somebody over a disagreement over how Bitcoin could be. There's never been an indictment on the exit tax, an exit tax that most legal scholars consider unconstitutional in the first place. Nor has there ever been this kind of prosecution brought for someone already left the country, taxing him for things that happened after he was no longer even a citizen based on money he made that was not even from the United States. Not only that, Roger Ver throughout this time period had tried to use the Freedom of Information Act and the Privacy Act to check up on what the government was doing and asked them, if I owe any tax, please let me know. He asked them over and over and over again, do I owe any tax? They never answered him. Instead, their only answer was an indictment. Even God answers people's prayers now and then. The government thinks it's above and beyond God in the prosecution of Roger Ver. But that wasn't all of the wayward rogue nature of the Ver prosecution. The second aspect is it was a selective prosecution because almost nobody else that was similarly situated has ever been prosecuted. What's unique about Roger Ver is his outspoken speech. It's the only reason he's being indicted. It has nothing to do with tax, and it never did. Last but not least, the government committed extensive and expansive misconduct and malfeasance in the investigation and prosecution of Roger Ver. First, they lied to a federal judge to steal his attorney-client privilege communications. But they didn't end there. After stealing those attorney-client privilege communications, they then lied about what they found. And they didn't just lie about what they found to the federal judge. They turned around and lied to a grand jury about it. They lied within the Justice Department to their own superiors about it. They lied to a foreign government in Spain about it. They lied to a foreign court in Spain about it. They lied to anybody and everybody they could to secure a bogus indictment and a bogus extradition request riddled and littered with lies and misrepresentations. This case is an egregious case of government malfeasance and misconduct. It is a classic example of true lawfare, which has three constituent components most commonly attached to it. That is novel theories of prosecution. In other words, a basis, a legal theory, a factual evidentiary pattern that is never or is rarely used to prosecute someone. That is all over the Roger Ver case. Second, they are selective in the prosecution. In other words, similarly situated people who also, there's disputes about an exit tax or people who are disputes about a Bitcoin tax, were not similarly prosecuted. And what's distinctive about Roger Ver is his speech and advocacy in the court of public opinion. Last but not least, government misconduct. Government lies to judges. Government lies to juries. Government lies to government agencies. Government lies to foreign courts. Government lies to foreign officials. This is the most egregious case of criminal lawfare in the last half decade, not named January 6th or Donald Trump. And it is embarrassing to the Trump administration that has an official public policy to promote crypto, an official public policy to make America the heart and the safe haven for Bitcoin around the world. For a Trump administration that has an official DOJ policy, they will not use criminal prosecutions to create new regulations like this case does. Everything about this case that came from the Biden Justice Department is an embarrassment to the Trump administration. And if Trump is going to honor and keep his word to the American people, to keep the policy commitments he has towards Bitcoin, towards crypto, towards the end of lawfare, then he needs to dismiss the case against Roger Ver tomorrow. That's what needs to happen if we're going to have Bitcoin Jesus free. And there's nobody better to pardon Bitcoin Jesus than Donald Trump himself. Now, back to Viva. This is from the Bitcoin conference. Everybody have fun.